Welcome all. So, here, as the title of the video says, I'm going to basically go ahead and show you how you can pass the GPUs within your system to your virtual machines on Linux and basically have 2-3 Windows machines on which you can play games with pretty good frames per second, like up to 100 depending on your graphics card. And I did notice that some other people have managed to do this on YouTube, and I struggled with this for a while. Originally, I did not intend to do this for a video or anything like that. Rather, instead, I wanted to do this for myself because I wanted to be able to play games with my friends here, and my main operating system is Fedora 23, which is a Linux operating system. So obviously, most of the games out there, unfortunately, do not run on Linux. However, there was an option where I could have installed Wine, the Windows compatibility layer, and that would have worked, but that's a single machine. I require more than one machine to be able to play with my friends. So I've decided to purchase 2 GPUs and be able to pass one GPU to one virtual machine and one to the other, and have the third GPU, which is basically occupied and used by the host operating system, the Linux Fedora 23. I have been bashing my head against the wall, struggling with this for a while now, I think 3 or 4 weeks. Now, there's some other people on YouTube that have managed to do this. They've went about doing this in a completely different way. It's thousands upon thousands of dollars invested, and they've managed to succeed. And if you are willing to invest 10, 20K, don't bother watching this video. I mean, you're not gonna need it, because what I managed to do is just have my ordinary machine that I use for my daily work, and I've managed to just get money to buy 2 GPUs, which I plugged into the PCI slots and passed to the 2 separate VMs. Now, the entire setup might seem expensive when I say that everything in total was $6,000–7,000, something like that, but you do not need that much money. I use my machine for a lot of things, and I didn't buy it primarily to be a virtualization solution for gaming. When I bought it, I didn't buy the entire thing straight away. I upgraded it over a certain period of time, and I've managed to assemble it. But you do not require this amount of money. There is literally no reason why you should spend this amount. As I said, I use the machine for a ton load of other things, work, rendering some videos, programming, Android development, which does require a good amount of RAM and a powerful processor. So when I bought my machine, I bought it with those considerations in mind. I really didn't buy it for this particular setup, but over time, I realized that it would be fun and nice to basically have 2 VMs, so my friend wouldn't need to bring any laptops or anything like that. My friend would come over and we could just pop up 2 VMs and begin playing. Now, if you've been following me on YouTube, I'm not doing this demo from the office because this is my house setup and has nothing to do with the office at the time. This is my general outline of my entire project, my small hobby household project. So I have a host machine here. This is like PC1, PC2, PC3. So there are 3 machines in total. 2 are virtual machines and 1 is a host machine. So you have a host which has a host GPU. So even if you think about it this way, if you intend to pass a GPU to a virtual machine, you need to reserve 1 for your host, because obviously, perhaps technically you don't, and you would be able to just SSH into the session or something like that, but yeah, just forget about that. You need a GPU for the host, and you need the GPUs for the virtual machines. Now, before I actually begin explaining the setup, just let me I have managed to get very good performance with games. It was running anywhere between 60 and 100 FPS depending on the settings. We played Overwatch on ultra settings. Heroes of the Storm had to be lowered down to medium. And I don't know, some other games where you like playing WoW or something like that, generally Blizzard games. So they all work just fine in a virtualized environment. The trick is to get the environment going and to actually set it up. as I said, I've been bashing my head against the wall and reading the forums on the net. One person in particular was very helpful in this regard. I've never met him before in my life, but I do believe that I'll provide the link somewhere down below if I don't forget. His name is Alex Williamson. I hope that I did not butcher the name in terms of pronunciation, but you can find his blog on the net in terms of virtualization. So I took some information from there while I used some information from there while I was conducting this setup, and I even sent him a message, and he was very kind, and he replied. So I utilized information from that blog, from Stack Overflow, from other blogs, from a download of places, but in general, I found that none of those things basically worked for me. I had to do something rather different. There was always a bug somewhere, there was always a problem somewhere, and the setup just kept on failing and failing and failing. The VMs booted up, but they either wouldn't recognize the card, or they would crash, or the driver installation would crash the VMs. Sometimes even the host system and all the other VMs crashed at the same time, which was problematic to say the least, and very frustrating, especially because my disk is completely encrypted, so every time I power off the machine and power it back on, it's a process. You have to decrypt the disks, you have to provide the grub password, and then you have to log into your user, and then of course you need the root prompt to perform this virtualization, so you need to log in as root via the terminal as well. So yeah, every time I had to reboot the machine, it was a problem. If somebody's wondering, I don't have the passwords or the encryption keys written down anywhere. They're like purely in my head. How I managed to remember them is beyond me. I cannot remember the license plate numbers of my own car. I cannot remember the street numbers or anything like that, but encryption keys, passwords, everything like that, that I can remember, no problems. I can not use that encryption key for a month or more, and after a month or more I'll be able to just type it in, no problems. Anyway, I managed to get it going. Works just fine now. It's fairly successful setup, I would say. There's still some bugs here and there, but nothing really of any importance that I need to mention here. That's more me being a perfectionist than anything else. Anyway, you have a host machine which has a GPU of its own. If you're wondering why I'm looking up the front, I have a screen over there where I can actually see myself casting. It's quite funny, I can tell you that, because I was kind of worried that you won't be able to see things in the blackboard, and it took like an hour to draw this because I and other people were really like experts at drawing things. So if it looks a little bit confusing, forgive me about that. Forgive me. So you have a host system, which is Fedora 23, Linux, and you have a GPU which is reserved by the host system. That's the PC1. So then use KVM and you create additional 2 VMs. So you have one here and one here. And these 2 additional VMs, you have Windows installed there. So I installed Windows 10. I installed the trial version just to see whether it would work or not. Then I realized, during the long process of trial and error and during a lot of posts in the forums, and people from Linux Questions were kind enough to help me out, and from other forums as well, somebody told me that you actually needed to have Windows 10 Pro in order for the VM to be able to recognize more than one processor core as a virtual machine, which is like, oh god. I mean, I don't understand why didn't they include that in the trial version. I just needed to try it out. Obviously, if it worked, I would need a Windows 10 license, but the Windows 10 license expires anyway after a certain period of time, so I really don't understand why you would place such horrific limitations. Maybe there are no limitations, I don't know, but somebody in the forum said that there is a limitation in terms of licensing of what you can do that's limiting you, so I had to play around with that. Anyway, so I created 2 VMs. Each VM had a GPU of its own. I bought 2, I'm not sure if you can read this, it's 2 GTX 970s manufactured by Asus from NVIDIA. And the primary graphics card that I use for my Linux workstation is the FirePro W600, series, which is a display wall graphics card. You're able to plug in 6 monitors. It has 6 mini display ports on it. Out of those 6, 4 are taken because I have 4 monitors lined up, 2 of which obviously shall be passed to the VM and 2 I use for Linux, but it doesn't matter. You just switch on the monitor the input signal, and you can switch between the VMs and the host machine without any problems. Now, the GPUs are reserved. So each machine is using exactly 1 GPU. Host is disconnected completely from these 2 GPUs. This needs to be done. And then the machine needs to be rebooted. And then the host will release these 2 GPUs. It will have nothing to do with them. And then you install the VMs, and you can pass them to these VMs, and they will reserve them, grab them, and they will be theirs. The host will no longer meddle with them at all. Now, this is just the intro video, of course. I will give you technical details, and I will do screen recording, and I'll show you all the commands that I did and all the problems that I went through in order to achieve this. As I said before, I know that other people did this, but very few people actually explained the entirety of the process and what they did. And some people have used enterprise level systems, so if you're going to use an enterprise level system, as I said, you don't need to watch this. You're good to go. I mean, you have full support there anyway. Okay, so aside from the GPUs that are assigned, the GPUs are not considered to be shared resources here, as each machine has its own GPU. Now, the shared resources of the system, that would be the CPU, RAM, disk, and the network integrated card. So these are the resources that all the machines are sharing. Now, host is accessing them, and these 2 virtual machines are accessing these devices through the host. You can see that there's a line here. So VMs access these components through the host system. So they do not access them directly. Keep that in mind. That is a very good security measure. Anyway, there are a few flags on your processors and on your motherboards that you will need to have, without which this setup is impossible. This is non-negotiable. So your processor, first of all, it doesn't matter whether it's AMD or Intel. Intels need to have VTD flag, and AMD needs to have the VI flag. If you don't have those 2 flags in the processor, don't attempt the setup. It will not work. Nobody has succeeded thus far. Maybe in some far-fetched future we will be able to. And the motherboard needs to have support for the I/O as well. Now, these things, how you can figure them out, etc., you can go to the next video, and I'll basically show you how you can figure out whether your processors and your motherboard and your components are fit for virtualization, whether you can actually do this in a hardware sense, because these are hardware requirements. If your system does not satisfy them, feel free to try it, but you'll fail. Anyway, my system here, I have Asus Deluxe X99. You do not need to have it. You can have a lot cheaper motherboard than that one. I have an Intel i7 59060X. Again, you do not need to have it. You can have a lot cheaper processor, as long as it has certain supported options. In the follow-up tutorial, in the follow-up video, however you wish to call it, I will do a demo, and I will show you exactly how you can take a look at your processor and take a look at your motherboard and see whether they actually have hardware support for this sort of setup. So you can skip to the next video if you want to figure that out. Anyway, I have 32 gigs of RAM on this system, and believe it or not, I believe that about 50% of the time, about 20 gigabytes are continuously taken by something. I don't know. When I'm rendering videos, all 32 gigabytes are spent, and even the swap space is taken on the disk, which is horrible. The system slows down quite a bit, and perhaps I'll show you later on the screenshots of my processor load, of the load on the processor cores and the RAM that was taken during one of my rendering sessions, because just when I managed to assemble this computer, I've actually wanted to put it to a test. I wanted to see what it can do. So I've set it to render 50 videos at the same time, which was hilarious to say the least. The core temperature of the processors went up to 90 degrees or more. The screen stopped refreshing. RAM was completely spent. Swap space was taken on the drive. And as the screen stopped refreshing, I could no longer monitor the temperatures. I was kind of afraid that something's going to happen, but I was like, okay, Intel has a failsafe at 105 degrees, unless otherwise configured in BIOS, I think. It's going to shut the machine down as soon as it reaches 105 degrees, so I'm safe in that regard. But regardless that my monitor was actually frozen, I was still able to render the videos and all that was happening in the background, except I just couldn't move the mouse. Well, I could, but if I moved the mouse, I was facing up to a minute of a delay for it to move from left to right, which was basically a which is basically a screen frozen scenario. Anyway, if you have spare AMD cards lying around, I did not manage to achieve this setup with AMD cards. Some people out there have, I haven't. Why? I'm not a hater of AMD or anything like that. I really couldn't care less whether it's NVIDIA or AMD. Actually, I prefer AMD because AMD is closer to open source, which means that their products function really well on Linux. And since I'm a Linux user primarily, that suits me a lot. But I just couldn't do it with AMD. Problems. I could pass the graphic card. The Windows VM could actually see the graphics card. It was there. But the driver that I downloaded from the AMD website kept on crashing the VM, and I had no solution for that. I tried and I tried and I tried and I tried, but I failed. Although I had very old AMD graphic cards, maybe if you have newer ones you can give it a shot. The procedure is the same. I used Radeon 270 or 250. I think it was 250. I can't remember at this point in time. Doesn't matter. I failed. So I bought two GTX 970s. I would say a mid-range to upper range class of a graphics card, whatever. It does run games just fine. And the problem with these graphic cards, with NVIDIA graphic cards, was that I practically needed to fool the VM into thinking that it's not a virtual machine, because if the NVIDIA driver knows that it's a virtual machine, according to everybody out there on the internet, it's going to crash. And I have given it a shot, and by just turning the KVM flags on and off, kernel virtual machine, KVM, on and off, I've noticed that if it's off, the driver installs. If it's on, the driver basically crashes the machine and you get a blue screen of death, which is a problem. But I've managed to surpass it. It took me a very long time, as I said, 3 to 4 weeks. It took me to set this up with what can be considered an ordinary machine, nothing really that special. And you might think that the specs here with Asus Deluxe X99 and i7 5960 and 32 gigs of RAM, that's like an impressive setup, but believe me when I tell you, it wouldn't have made any difference if you had a lot older processor, a lot older motherboard, and a lot less RAM. Completely irrelevant. As long as they support the virtualization options, you're good to go. I mean, any AMD or Intel processor, along with a compatible motherboard with support for virtualization, will do just fine. You do not need to have higher end specs at all. In fact, you don't even need to have these graphic cards, but I have tested it out with GTX 970 and I know that it works. It should work with pretty much anything above. If you have some older NVIDIA cards from before, give it a shot, see if it works. The procedure is exactly the same. The only place where it will be different is in terms of driver installation. Okay, so now that we have the requirements, this is my system. You do not need to, if you have an older system, doesn't matter, as long as these flags are there. In the follow-up tutorial, I'll show you how to find out. In the follow-up tutorial, I'll show you the entire procedure. How can you establish whether your computer configuration actually is capable hardware-wise in supporting the system, in supporting the setup. Now, one important thing to mention here is that if you have a laptop, and if you have a dedicated GPU in the laptop, and if you have an integrated GPU on the processor, you are likely to fail with this setup. The pass-through you might succeed if you pass the integrated you might succeed if you pass the dedicated GPU and you use the integrated GPU for the host machine. If you're attempting to pass an integrated GPU, that's going to be a problem. If you use any of the APUs from the AMD or any of the graphic cards which come embedded into Intel processors, you're going to have problems passing those graphic cards. Yeah. Feel free to bother with that. I think there was reports of some sort of success, but I definitely wouldn't recommend it. Just have a separate video card which you are passing to the virtual machine and not the integrated one. Very important thing to keep in mind. Another thing to keep in mind that you will need licensed Windows for this to work. So if you have licensed copies of Windows or something like that, good. If not, I don't know, manage in whatever way you can, I don't know, or you can buy one or something like that, I don't know. But the VM will actually run on a trial version, and you will be able to pass the GPU to the trial version. However, the problem with the trial version is that you shouldn't be able to pass more than one processor core. So your machine will look like it's running on only one CPU core, which can degrade performance for gaming or anything like that. Anyway, as I said, gaming works just fine. We'll do a demo later on and I'll show you how it actually works. But other than that, you know everything that you need to know up to this point of time. This is the schematics of the setup that I am going to create for you, that I will show you how you can create this for yourselves on your home PC. That's fairly cheap, and all you need is really the graphic cards that are capable of running high-end games. Or you don't even need good graphic cards. You can buy pretty bad graphic cards and play games on low settings, but they will still run without any problems or difficulties of whatsoever, as far as I've seen, as far as I've tested. I mean, I've been testing this setup extensively for a week now, and I have not encountered any significant problems thus far. A bug here and there, something trivial, no problems. Another thing to keep in mind is that you will actually require additional keyboard and an additional mouse. So for every machine, you're going to need a mouse and a keyboard. So keep that in mind. You will need to do a USB pass-through, and every virtual machine here is going to need a separate mouse and a keyboard. If you have two virtual machines like this and one guest system, you can buy only one mouse and one more keyboard, and you can pass them to one virtual machine, while the first virtual machine can actually share the mouse and the keyboard from the host machine. So it saves a little bit of money there. Now, keyboards, mouses, really irrelevant, anything that you have lying around, as long as it's a USB. So make sure it's a USB. I really haven't tried it on older keyboards with PS ports or whatever. It's like PS1, something like that. I forgot. It's been a while since I've seen them anyway. I'm not sure will that work though. You need a USB mouse and a USB keyboard enabled in order for you to be able to do this. Now, keep in mind that you can pass any USB device. USB pass-through is very simple, functional, and stable. So you can pass any USB device to a virtual machine. So you can plug your phone in, you can pass it to the virtual machine. You can plug a USB stick, you can pass it to a virtual machine. You can plug a USB microphone that I have, you can plug it into a virtual machine without any problems of whatsoever. So any USB will function, any storage, anything like that. When you create the VMs, I would suggest that you assign no less than 100 gigabytes to each virtual machine. The bare minimum that is required is actually 20 gigabytes, but I always assign 30 just to make sure that it functions. You never want to go with 20. Bare minimum is 30 gigabytes, but if you plan to install any games, and I imagine that you will need at least 100 gigs for each virtual machine. So you can use an HDD, doesn't really matter, it will slow the VM down a little bit in terms of booting and actually loading the games, but in terms of game performance itself, it shouldn't affect it at all. One final consideration to make is that you will have 95% of native performance. So there will be a 5% reduced performance because these machines are not communicating directly with the hardware. These machines, well, sort of not communicating directly with the hardware. They're communicating through the host system. They only have the GPUs that are passed to them. But the CPU, the RAM, the disk, the network card, they all have to share those resources. And they are accessing it through the host system. You also need a bit of a higher internet speed if there's like more than one person playing there, but it's nothing spectacular. I mean, your standard house package from your ISP provider should do. So I'm going to go ahead and bid you farewell here, and in the follow-up video we're going to go ahead and move on. I'll start recording the screens, and then I'll go into the screen, and then I'll go into the system, well, not into the screen, I'll just show you the physical side of this, how I managed to assemble this and pass it. And then after that, we will move into the next tutorial where we will get into the technical details, where I'll actually show you the command line. I'll start recording my desktop, and you will be able to see all the commands that I did. You'll have the entire procedure there, and I'll most likely document the entire procedure as well. So I hope you enjoyed the video, and I hope if you have any interest in this setup, I hope that you succeed in doing it, and I sincerely hope that this setup will help the Linux community at larger scale, because a lot of people have been encountering these problems and a lot of people have been failing. There were a lot of questions how to do this and problems. So what I'm going to do here is I will show you the entire procedure. I will show you all the problems that I've encountered and how I've solved them, so you don't have to bother with that. Before I finish, huge shout out to pretty much all the Linux forums out there, especially Linux Questions and Alex Williamson, all those people that basically helped me out with their input in setting up this, in creating this setup.